on the heels of a U.S. move to veto a UN Security Council vote on a call for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The General Assembly is set to have its say on the motion, but the vote is non-binding. And with that, we're going to bring in CTV News political analyst Eric Ham for a look at what kind of impact the results are going to have either way. So let's go back to Friday for a moment and the U.S. decision to veto the Security Council vote. Was that expected?
It was. In fact, President Biden has been making clear since the beginning of this war that Israel has every right to defend itself. And we have seen over and over the United States continue to block the ceasefires in the UN. And now we see it moving out of the Security Council to the General Assembly, where, as you mentioned, this is non-binding, so it doesn't have any weight or merit behind it. But again, what we're seeing here is the UN attempting to try to build support for this. However, what we're seeing is Israel's biggest ally, the United States, remains dug in, even as the world looks at the horrors and atrocities of this war and are looking and hoping that there's some way for this war to come to a quick end.
Okay, so as you mentioned, this is going to be non-binding, this vote today. What kind of effect will the General Assembly support for a ceasefire? What kind of effect would that have?
Well, the hope is that it could potentially apply pressure to a nation like the United States. But I don't think we're going to see that because, again, you still need to get this out of the UN Security Council, where, of course, we know the United States holds sway and does have a vote. And those actually are binding. And so I think what we're seeing here, unless or until the United States decides that it wants to see a change, and it doesn't appear as though we're going to see that anytime soon, these are going to only be meritless and they're going to be for show. And right now, the pressure doesn't appear to be working either on Benjamin Netanyahu or on President Biden.
Okay, what about negotiations for a short-term ceasefire like we saw a little while ago?
Well, again, when that took place, we know that the United States was certainly heavily invested because we know that was for the exchange of hostages, some of those who were Americans. President Biden needed and wanted every effort to ensure that there was a peaceful exchange of hostages. I think if something like that is put back on the table, we could see the United States actually support a momentary, a pause, at least in fighting for the exchange of hostages and prisoners. But I think that's the only condition that the United States is prepared to meet at this time.
And, you know, as it relates to the UN, what is the global climate right now on the Israel-Hamas war?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing tensions continue to ratchet up. In fact, we already know that the United States has exchanged heavy gunfire with radicals from Hezbollah and other places. In addition to that, we're seeing the tensions between Israel and Turkey continue to grow. Turkey is a member of NATO, a stalwart ally of the United States. And so this is drawing more countries in. And right now, where we know that the United States has sought to try to be an ally to try to alleviate some of the pressure, what we're seeing is that pressure is continuing to grow. And in fact, it's causing tremendous political damage for President Biden, at least in the short term, here in the United States, particularly among his base of support, now, namely with African Americans and, of course, Muslim Americans who backed him over Donald Trump by more than 20 points in the last election.
What about humanitarian aid? What's going on there, especially with all the talks and, you know, the WHO as it relates to the UN?
Well, look, we now know that where at one time there were at least 38 hospitals in the Gaza Strip, approximately, we know now because of this war, they're down to only 18. And so the humanitarian aid is continuing to be something that even the United States has called for greater humanitarian aid. In fact, we know right now there is a funding package in Congress that's being held up that would actually provide additional humanitarian support to the region. But still, what we're seeing is there's just not enough actually getting into the region. And one of the reasons for that is because of the demand is so high. But what we're seeing is the Israeli Defense Forces are continuing to pummel the area, making it that much more difficult for that aid to reach those that need it the most.
CTV News political analyst Eric Ham, thanks a lot for the latest update.
You bet. Thank you.